Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's been PF, and on today's episode we've got a little bit of a treat for me here because we've got a double act of Limeburners here. Now, you might remember a couple of months ago I had a live stream with the Limeburners guy, Cameron Sim. He came on and he was in the UK time zone, so he came on live stream. We had a bit of a chat. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any Limeburners to try at the time, so we just talked about the distillery, his experience with whiskey and whatnot, rather than actually delving into any whiskey itself. Now, the legends over there, they then decided they were going to send me these two bottles and some of their new make actually, as a bit of a thank you for having them on, which was really nice of them, really unexpected. It took a little bit of time, unfortunately, because they did ship it over from Australia, and it took a bit of a while to get over it, and I've been sort of picking the right moment to cover these guys because I wanted to put them together. It seems only right to put them together as a bit of a face-off rather than trying to do individual bottles. You'll notice these are 350 milliliter bottles, and I call this a treat to me mainly because, you know, if you're in the UK, if you're in Australia, these are hard enough to get, but if you're in the UK or the US, these are basically impossible to get without buying them directly from Australia and paying the kind of massive import taxes on already frankly very expensive whiskey. Now, you'll have to go back and check the live stream out to kind of get a bit more in-depth understanding into how they go about distilling, but they're making whiskey in a pretty expensive way anyway. You know, it's all done by hand. It's all done by the same people over and over again. You know, they've got a couple of different distilleries now, but it's not cheap the way they're making it, and it reflects it in the bottle price. But that said, Australian whiskey is generally speaking expensive at the moment. You know, when we're talking about here, referring to notes, this one here, the darkest, runs for this bottle. They do a full size bottle as well, but this bottle is 215 Australian dollars, which works out, it's about half, so about £110 UK for this. This one's a little bit cheaper. This port cask runs about £73, so that's 143 Australian dollars. So yeah, it's a lot of money basically. It's a lot of money for this half size bottles, 350 milliliters. But factor that in. But yeah, if you ever get to try some Australian whiskey, there's some really fantastic stuff coming out of there. But because they haven't got many huge producers, it's all kind of like craft distilling on a very small scale. Those scales, you know, like if you look at your kind of production scales, the more you can produce, the cheaper the final product can be, essentially. And that's what's driving these prices up. Basically, is the scarcity, the low volumes of it. But yeah, in any case, let's get into the actual whiskies and see what we've got on the shelf today, because we've got here two very high strength whiskies. We've got the port cask strength, and here is the darkest winter. Now these are all batch produced, so you have to be careful about which batch you're picking, especially if you're following on from me. If you do happen to pick up the same bottles as me, if it's a different number, then it's going to be an entirely different experience. In this case, we've got the barrel M607, and this is the M212. Both of these, I think, are still available right now. 61%, 63.7% respectively. So, yes, this one's peated, so I'm going to do this one after the port cask, but don't worry about my palate because I've done my tasting notes before the video already anyway. But yeah, let's get this first one out. This is the port cask strength. Little wee beauty of a bottle. You can see the colour on that is astounding. These are all natural coloured, non-chill filtered. Why not? 61%, and as I said, actually surprisingly cheap considering the value of this one here. Yeah, around about £73 for this kind of wee bottle. But yeah, look, you know, you can see in here, it's got a beautiful rose gold kind of colour that it's typical from kind of port influence, I think. But this is initially aged in ex-bourbon, just like a lot of their stuff is, and then it's rematured, let's say. I'm not sure about the time frames here, but they don't call it finishing, they call it rematuring, but essentially the same difference in a port cask, which is interestingly enough probably why it's on the expensive side, right? Because port is Portuguese, correct? I don't know much about fortified wines, I must admit. Let's get onto the actual nose then and see what we've got, onto things I actually do know about. Now for me, this has got an immensely beautiful fruity nose to it. It's bags of raisins, but like, I know they're dried fruits, but like really juicy raisins rather than kind of really shriveled ones. bags of figs. It's got some sugary elements to it, some jammy elements to it. It's almost like a cake. It's really lovely nose. Let's try on the palate. Yeah, just superb. Really big jam notes, lots and lots of the kind of fruity notes that we got earlier. But on top of that, it's also got a kind of like a tannic elements at the back end, some leatheriness and some tobacco that I'm really enjoying. I mean, this is a superb whiskey. And I have to say as well, the ABV, although clearly high, it isn't making itself known as high ABV. Really, it's just producing that extra flavour. You know, like in the barbecue world, we say that fat is flavour. In the whiskey world, ABV can be flavour, or it can play against you, especially when it's really high, over 60 like these are. But in this case, my palate barely registers it as like too high. It just registers it as flavour. And I really, really enjoy that one. This is a really good whiskey. Absolutely love that. Okay, let's move on to the darkest winter then. This one, the M212, 118 bottles in this batch. You can on here as well. They can say bottle 101.1, which I guess is because it's a half size. So there must be a sister bottle to this somewhere. I don't know, maybe. But yeah, 63.7%. This one's got a peaty element to it. Again, ex-bourbon barrels, so it's not. It's that ex-bourbon vibes that we're looking at. You can tell by the colour here as well. The smokiness comes from the malting process, and they use an extra long smoking process using the kind of Australian peats. They're not importing that at all, but still, it's again an expensive process. So it's yeah, a lot more money, a lot more money. But you know, if you're into your peaty whiskey, this is probably going to be the one that you like. Again, non-chill filtered, natural coloured. It's got I mean, you can see the one we just tried, rose gold. This one's much more traditional whiskey flavour, whiskey colour, but it's that kind of like golden element to it, which is lovely. Let's try on the nose then. Okay, so for me, the smoke is definitely prevalent, but it isn't like super in your face. It's more like, I mean, I'm literally smelling burnt wood, like rather than kind of smoke or peat or anything like that. It's like literally I can smell the like a cask burning basically. It takes over the whole nose, so there's not really much else on there apart from that. You know, some fruity elements, some kind of. I mean, I guess you would probably call it vanilla, but that's a really standard kind of tasting note to pick out from this. But nevertheless, it's still a beautiful nose. I love a good smoky whiskey, and this is definitely that. Let's try on the palate. Now here's where those that sweetness comes through, those kind of more vanillas coming through. Definitely at the start, very prevalent. Lasts quite a long way through it actually, but the smoke starts to creep in pretty quickly. Again, it's not really, I said smoke, but it's not really kind of smokiness. It's definitely more on the medicinal side this time on the palate versus the nose. But it's really hard to actually describe it because it isn't really like any other kind of smokiness I've tried before. It isn't medicinal like Lefroy. It isn't briny like Kalila or Ardbeg. It isn't heathery like Highland Park. It's its own vibe of smokiness, which I really love. And it's, you know, like I said, it's got that little bit of sweetiness to it as well. A little bit of pepperiness on the back end. Let's have another little sip for the finish. Yeah, super tasty. It's I mean, it's definitely smoky. I'm not going to say it isn't. For my palate, who loves peaty smoky whiskey, it isn't overly so in any of those flavours, but it might be for someone who isn't really into whiskey that much. Again, with 63.7% this time, doesn't really make itself known. It's definitely high strength for sure, but yeah, it's not overpowering at all. It's just adding to the flavour, which I really love that. These two excellently put together whiskies. Really enjoying that. In terms of my favourite, oddly, I mean, you might be able to tell already just from the fill levels on these. I mean, I love this peated cask one, but this port cask is astonishing. I absolutely love it. So much so, yes, all right, they sent me these bottles, but for a special whiskey, I mean, these will not get drunk very often at all. They'll be put aside to be brought out to people who really know what they're talking about when it comes to whiskey if they visit. I actually might be tempted to try and get another bottle of this when this one dies, because it's absolutely fantastic. It's a lot of money, but I think I might be tempted to get the double size, to be honest. But yeah. Let me know in the comments below if you've actually managed to try some Limeburners in your time. We do see them in the UK sometimes. I don't think that they're producing the volume just yet to be able to get over to us in any kind of huge way that's affordable to us. It's just going to be really, really expensive. But when I have seen them here, it's always been good quality bottles. And I should say as well, these two are expensive, but these are the cask strength versions. There are, like the port cask, for instance, has a lower ABV version of it that's much cheaper. So it's definitely worth checking them out for the lower strength versions. Don't be put off by the prices I'm quoting today. Yes, again, it is a lot, but that's kind of the going rate for it at the moment. I can't imagine they've just slapped on a really high price just to make loads of money off of it. I think it's probably because their costs are very high. But yeah, there you go. Massive thanks to them for sending these over, and for the chat I had with Cameron a couple of months ago. Really, really knowledgeable people, excellent whiskey makers. They've been going for, I don't know, something like 23 years now, which is amazing. Really love that, and I wish them all the best trying to get over here and into the US as well. But yeah, let me know if you've tried them before. Let me know what you've tried and what your thoughts are. In any case, I'll see you again on more No Nonsense Whiskey videos. I'm going to go and enjoy the rest of this port cask.